Hi everyone, how's everybody doing? I hope you're having a great day thus far. Today we're actually going to tackle chapter 4 in Interplay. We're going to go through it today, take a few minutes of your time. Hopefully you've got it all together. As I said before, if you have your book and you want to follow along as I lecture, you're more than welcome to do that. Actually, as a matter of fact, I recommend it. Other people, they like to read and then sort of get a refresher with me as I lecture. But whatever way helps you learn a little bit better, I'm here to help you. And as always, if you have any questions, you're always welcome to email me, and you can either ask me the question via email, or you could simply send me a request, and we can have a Zoom meeting live. All right. With that being said, chapter 4 is going to start off. It actually starts off on on page 103, but the reading actually starts on page 104. So that's where we're going to start. So let's begin. So, chapter 4 talks about perceiving others. Now, let's talk about that for a second before we move on. When we're talking about perceiving others, we're talking about the idea here of communication, right? So, how does perceiving others affect your communication? How does the idea of how I perceive you, how I see you, what I think of you affect how I communicate with you? Well, it actually affects you a lot. Because how I see you, or more importantly, how you see me, right? What your perception is of me will also affect your communication with me. Remember, it's a two-way process here. We're talking about two people, but perceiving others, right? That's what this chapter is about. So it is safe to say that how I see you, we're talking about me personally, how I see you will affect how I communicate with you. And that's pretty true for everybody. Think about that. How do you see your parents versus how you see your friend? How do you see your boss versus how you see your coworker? And does that affect how you communicate with them? And chances are it does. People say, well, I talk the same, I don't change. You kind of do, right? What you say to your parents, how you speak to your parents is very different than how you speak to your friends, right? It is. With people in higher position, in a more respectful position, you tend to use a lot more respectful language. Your tone is a little bit different. It just is, right? And there's a lot of reasons why that happens. Okay, so let's talk about the perception process. All right, so when we're talking about the perception process, first thing we have to understand is not just what perception is, right? Perception is how I see you, but perception process is how do I arrive to that perception? How do I reach the conclusion that that's how I see you? And the first thing to understand here is that it isn't just is, it's a process. It happens. It happens um, with culture. It happens with my experience. It happens with my age. It happens with a whole lot of factors. We have to understand that perception is not just a reality that just exists. It's a reality that's sort of building. It's constructed. And a lot of it has to do with us, who we are, how we see other people, right? So it's also very important that we understand that it's a process, right? And because of that, we have to understand that the first part of the process is constructing it, it's building it, it's putting it together, right? And so the process actually has 4 steps. The first one is selection, the second one is organization, the third one is interpretation, and the fourth one is negotiation, right? And so let's talk about each step here. Now, and as I'm looking through this we're on page 106. So selection. Think of your perception process like a house, right? You're going to construct it, you're going to build it, right? So let's just say you're building your own house. Okay? So we're going to construct your house. So the construction is and the house is your perception, okay? So the first thing you're going to do is let's just go to Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever lumber yard you want, whatever hardware place. Well, we're going to build a small house, right? We're going to build one of those tiny houses that you see on TV sometimes. And the first thing you do is you go to the store, you go to Home Depot, and you start picking out things. You pick that out, you pick that out, you pick that out, you pick that out. You don't use everything, right? You select the things that you think you're going to need. That's what you do. See, you understand that the process of constructing your perception is based on information. And just like the Lowe's hardware store, when building a house, you select certain things, you select certain information and you pick at it, you get it from the shelf, and that selection of information will influence your perception, right? Now, let's go back to the house. So you put your order in, you get all this material, and then they come here, Home Depot delivers, so they bring the stuff and they just throw it to the ground. They just big trucks are it all goes down. So here you are on the job site, you're on the land, and you got a pile full of stuff. Do you just start working right off of that? No, right? You got to start like separating stuff. You got to organize stuff. You got to say, okay, all the wood material goes over here, all the plumbing stuff goes over there, all the kitchen stuff goes over here. You know, you start organizing it in a way so that it makes sense, right? You start organizing it so that you can have access to it, so you can retrieve it. Excuse me. It's the same thing with information. You're going to pick all this information that you want to use for your perception process, and then you're going to organize all that information in a way that makes sense to you, right? The next thing you're going to do is you're going to interpret that information, right? Now, I'm going to read this to you because I want to make sure that you get this. Interpretation is attaching meaning to sense data, right? It plays a role in virtually every interpersonal act. It is the person who smiles at you across a crowded room, interested in romance, or simply being polite. Is it a friend kidding, a sign of affection, or irritation? What does that mean? So, the way I describe it is this. You're getting all this information and then you organize it. Well, what does it mean? What does that smile mean? Right? What does it mean when they don't meet your expectations? What happens when you're talking to someone and that someone doesn't reciprocate the conversation? Right? Does that give you a bad vibe? Right? You have all this material. Let's go back to the house. You got all this material. You organize it. Now you have to look at it and be like, do I want to build a house 2-story or single story? What's better? Where do I get more satisfaction of? Should I make the kitchen smaller or bigger? Right? I still have to, now that I've separated all the information, I got to interpret what that information means. And once I figured out what that information means, then I got to negotiate. I got to say to myself, that's good or that's bad. You got to say, yes, that makes sense, or no, it doesn't make sense. Right? So first you get the information, then you organize it in certain ways where you can retrieve it. Then you figure out what it means by interpreting it. And then after you interpret it and you know what it means, then you have to negotiate and say, yes or no. Right? That's when you start putting all the stuff that you didn't want from Home Depot and you start returning it because you're like, nah, I decided I don't need it. I decided that I wanted a 1-story house, not a 2-story house. So all the leftover lumber, I'm going to take it back. That's what negotiation means. So you select the information, you organize it so that it makes sense to you. You know how to retrieve it. You interpret it so you understand what it means. And then you negotiate it and you say, good, bad. Okay, so that's the process. So now that we understand what the process is, what are some of the influences on perception, right? Now, we said a little bit earlier that the selection process is you have to select the information, right? What would happen if you don't have access to that information? What if you go to Home Depot and you want to buy all the materials for the house and they don't have 2x4s? So all they have is 2x6 and you're thinking, well, it's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal if 2x6s are more expensive. All of a sudden, the cost of your home went up by, 50%. It can have an effect. So therefore, the access of information that would influence your perception is very important because if you don't have access to it, then you may not have the proper perception. Now, other things that may influence your perception of others or how you communicate with others is your physiological influences. your age, your health, your biological cycles, hunger, and other challenges, right? And by the way, when we're talking about biological functions, let's not automatically think, oh, this or all that. There are a lot of biological functions, right? There's a lot of cycles that we go in our own personal lives. Are you more of a morning person or are you more of a nighttime person? That's a biological cycle. Are you someone who is going through sort of a high school situation, and you're trying to sort of navigate the waters of high school? Are you someone who's in kinder who, as long as you get your sandwich and your candy, you're solid? That might be age, but it's also sort of a biological cycle because it's influenced by what makes us happy or what makes us good biologically speaking, right? So there's all kinds of things that affect our age. Age can determine how we see. How you see family is very different from a 20-year-old to a 30-year-old to a 40-year-old. Your health is important, right? If you're tired, you don't want to talk to anybody. If you're hungry, you don't want to talk to anybody, right? It's sort of important to understand what are the things that influence us from a sort of a biological standpoint, and how it affects how we communicate with people. I can tell you, when my daughter gets angry because she's hangry, you don't want to talk to her. You don't. She's mean to everybody. I just want to eat. Can we just go home? I'm tired. All of a sudden, her way of communicating with us, it goes downhill. It just does. Why? Because she's hungry. That's a biological influence. Okay, let's go to the next one. So now we have psychological influence. So now we learned how the body, our biology, can affect our behavior. Let's talk about how psychologically, it can influence our behavior. Now, right now, I'm on page 112. So the first thing is your mood. Are you in a good mood or are you in a happy mood? I mean, good mood or bad mood? Uh, you know, did I catch you at a bad time? You ever hear somebody say that? Oh, I'm sorry, did I catch you at a bad time? Because they want to make sure that you're in a good mood. Because if you're not in a good mood, I don't want to talk to you. If you're in a bad mood, if I need a favor and you're in a bad mood right now for whatever reason, I better not ask you for that favor because chances are you're going to say no. You're in a bad mood. And mood can come from a lot of different sources, right? We're talking psychologically. If you just broke up with somebody that you've been together with for a long period of time, chances are you're going to be in a bad mood. It just is. And if you're going to be in a bad mood, are you going to have good conversations? More than likely not, right? Now, the other thing that we have to worry about is the self-concept, how you see yourself. How you see yourself determines how you perceive other people, right? If you see yourself as being better than everybody else, you're probably going to treat people in a negative way because you're going to feel you're better than them, right? And that's not a good way to treat people. It really goes away from the idea of respect. But when we see ourselves as better, then all of a sudden, what happens? Your tone, the words you use, they change and they make the other people feel bad. Now, some of the other social influences, which are things that are sort of outside of you but within the society of which you live, can also affect you, right? We have sex and gender roles, occupational roles, and relational roles, right? We are talking about sex and gender roles. And just to be specific, as the book will describe, sex refers to biological characteristics of male and female, whereas gender refers to the social and psychological dimensions of masculine and feminine behavior. Okay? So sometimes those two words are sometimes, used for meaning the same thing, but just understand that there is a difference there. But let's talk about sort of, what masculine and feminine is. We'll start, focusing on that. One of the things that comes across sometimes is who takes out the trash, who cleans the kitchen, who washes the dishes, who does the laundry, who cuts the grass, without even thinking to yourself that it's a situation that should be equal and everybody should do it. A lot of times people just sort of associate something based on what their gender is. I'm going to tell you a riddle real quick. You had a father and a son in a car accident. Okay, it's a major car accident. It was really bad. So it's a father and son, right? An ambulance comes over and picks up the dad, and another ambulance comes over and picks up the son. So you have two ambulances. One picks up the dad, one picks up the son, and they go to two different hospitals. Okay? All right. Now, one ambulance, takes the son to one hospital, and another ambulance takes the father to another hospital. In the hospital where the son is, he is rushed to the emergency room and then taken to the surgery room where he has to receive surgery. The doctor who's going to perform the surgery comes into the room and says, I cannot perform surgery on this person. This person is my son. Now, the question I have for you is, how is that possible? All right, so now what I want you to do is I want you to pause right here, right now, and I want you to think about it. And then when you give up, go ahead and press play again. Yeah, go ahead and press play, pause. I know you're pretending like you're gonna press, you're not pressing it. I want you to think about it because there's an exercise. So press pause right now. All right, now that you're back, hopefully you press pause. Now that you're back, what did you think the answer is? And it's sort of interesting sometimes when I give this lecture in class and I use that example, people will say, "Oh, that's the stepdad, that's the grandfather." It was it was two fathers. No, uh, the surgeon, the doctor, was his mother, and more likely than not, most people they don't associate doctor with being a woman. Why is that? Why do we see that sometimes? Why is it sometimes ingrained in our mind that it's like that? See, we have to think to ourselves that society plays a key role in how we see other people, not just based on their gender roles, but also based on, what job they have, occupational roles. What is their job? Based on what their job is, sometimes that'll determine a level of respect. I had a student one time who said, who when I asked the question, why do you want to go to college and, what's in it for you? He says, I want to go to college because I don't want to just work in retail at a supermarket. I want to have a good job. I get that, and I see where he's going. He wants to have a job that will pay him enough money to have a successful life for what he sees or she sees as what success is. But what's interesting is the way he worded it, it almost made it seem like being at a working retail or working at a supermarket was not a good job. And that could be farther from the truth because I know a lot of people who work in those settings and some of the nicest people that I've ever met. Working in a supermarket at times when it's really tough and, certain things are going on, that's an essential workforce, something to be respected. And something to understand that your job does not necessarily define who you are. But the thing is that sometimes people let that influence your perception in the way you see them. You have to be careful about that. The other thing we have here is relational roles, right? What's your relationship with that person? Are they an uncle or are they a cousin? Are they an aunt or are they, a sister? Is it your mom or your dad? And how you see them will impact how you um, how you interact with them. One of the things that's really interesting to me, and I think it happens in most Polynesian islands because I think it happens in others, but I know that for Hawaii, it happens quite a bit. It's part of their cult. It's part of who they are in that they call everybody auntie or uncle, even if they're not your auntie, even if they're not your uncle. because and now we're sort of heading to cultural influences is that in that culture, calling someone auntie or uncle is a sign of respect because everybody's related, everybody's family, right? Everybody takes care of each other. And using the word auntie or uncle is sort of a way to sort of show respect. And that's just not a relational role, that's a cultural influence. Okay, so let's move on to some of the things that happen sometimes when we perceive others. One thing is that we make snap judgments based on like a single event, based on something, an experience that just happened either just one time or something like that. We automatically assume that, oh, that's the way they are, right? You meet someone for the first time and they were just a total jerk, right? And then what happens? Then when you think about them, oh no, no, I don't want to hang out with that person. That person was a jerk. No, no, no. When I met him, well, what happened about when you met him? Maybe that person was having a tough day. Maybe that person got fired from work. Maybe that person broke up in a relationship. If that was the case and they weren't in the mood to talk to you, are we going to make a snap judgment and just assume that's the way they are all the time? Now, that's not to say that's not the way they are. You could be correct, but to do so on just one occasion, on one interaction, well, that really isn't fair to them. And to be quite honest, it really isn't fair to you. And that's where making a first impression is really important because a lot of times that's what we remember. That's what we cling to, right? Think of the first time that you met me and that I had the opportunity to share my stories with you. What did you think of me then? And did that have a sort of an impact on how you see me now? Right? So that's important to understand too. Now, one of the things that we often do is we judge ourselves more charitably than we do others. And what that means is that when we do something wrong, when you do something wrong, you're bad. I can't believe you did that. We do the same thing. You're like, yeah, I know I did it, but I had a good reason for it. Or you know what, yeah, I know it's bad, but I did it for the right reasons. Or there's always a reason. In other words, when they do it, oh, it's just wrong. You're just a jerk. I can't believe you did that. When we do it, it's like, oh, I'm just going through some things. It's not that I'm a jerk. It's like, hey, I'm just going through something. Why can't we have that same sort of ideas for those other people the way we see ourselves? And then the last thing here on this slide is that we're influenced by our expectations. You know, if we go in there and we expect this and that person gives us this, we're like, oh, well, you didn't come here, so yeah, you're just bad. Really? Well, why could if they're here, why couldn't you have just lowered here? You know, it's like we do this sometimes. My wife and I is we'll Yelp something, you know, for a restaurant, and we're like, okay, where do we go? Let's Yelp. Let's help a local business. And so we'll look at the stars and we'll look at the reviews, and we're like, ooh, yeah, we're excited. And then we go, and you're like, oof, yeah, that was not 5 stars or 4 stars, whatever that is. It could be very good food, but because we went in there with this and they gave us this, we're like, yeah. But if we went to a place and we were just like, all right, let's check it out. I don't know. I have no expectations or, you know, it looks okay. Let's, you know, we go in there and all of a sudden you're like, oh, all right, cool. I liked it. You may not have been totally impressed, like, oh my God, but at least you're like, all right, cool. I'm happy with it. And that's kind of the way we are. When I go to Denny's, and let's be straight here. I'm not saying that Denny's is by far Fleming's or some high-end restaurant. I know it's not. But I have my expectations for Denny's. I know what I'm going to get, and I have an idea of the service and the quality of the food that I'm paying for. And so when I go there, that's what I get. In many ways, that's kind of what makes Denny's such a popular place because people know what they're getting, and when they go there, they get exactly what they get. You go to the Denny's here in Rancho Cucamonga, you go to the Denny's in Upland, you go to the Denny's in Fontana, you go to any Denny's, and chances are you're going to have the same experience. Your expectations are met. And when your expectations are met, you're satisfied. And sometimes that's all we need is satisfaction. We don't need to be blown away. You don't go to a Denny's and go, oh, my best steak I ever had. Why? Because that's not your expectation. Now you go to Fleming's, where it's like 75 bucks for a plate, that better be really good steak. And to be quite honest with you, it really is. And I don't go there often, but when I did, it was really good steak. I'm sorry for you vegetarians. Potatoes were good, so was the asparagus. So there you go. Um, so keep in mind is that we are often influenced by what our expectations are. So if we manage our expectations, guess what's going to happen? Right? The other thing is that we are influenced by the obvious. You know, we think, how do you not see? How do you not see that? It's right there. What are we looking at? You know, but you don't know what's going on. You know, you could say it's a green light. How do you not see that? It's literally right there. You're like, well, I'm sorry, I'm colorblind. Oh, right? All of a sudden you have to say, like, ooh, because you have to understand is what's obvious to us isn't necessarily always obvious to other people. And for that, you know, and that kind of leads us to the next thing, which is that we assume that others are like us. We assume that other people have our same experience, same education, same culture, and that's not necessarily true. My vitamin juice. So we have to understand that just because um, we may live in the same society, it doesn't mean that everybody is like each other. And how you see things is very different. And being able to understand that and be able to sort of remove those assumptions makes it better for everybody. So now that we understand what that is, right? Sort of the what happens or how things can go wrong in the perception process. How do we sort of fix that? And we do that by what's called synchronizing our perceptions. And the first thing is perception checking. The first thing is when you start, thinking about how you're going to talk to somebody, say to yourself, put the brakes on a little bit, say, ooh, wait a second, let me think. This person may not necessarily be aware of this. Let me take a step back. Let me reword what I was gonna say in a different way where I think it's more sort of encompassing, right? So a lot of times we have to check ourselves, right, before we say something or think about what we're gonna say so that we can say it correctly. The next thing we got to do is we got to build empathy. And empathy defined is really sort of putting ourselves in the other person's perspective. You hear the saying that goes, put yourself in their shoes. And that's kind of what that means. What is it like to be in their shoes? How can you sort of understand that? And in understanding how they see something, how they perceive something, what's their perspective, it could possibly change your perspective, right? The other thing you want to do is you can experience empathy, both in giving it and in receiving it. Empathy is looking at someone and say, I understand what you're going through. I understand what you mean. Letting him know that, hey, you get it. But on the other hand, is having somebody tell you, I understand what you're going through. And someone telling me like, I get you, Jaime. I know what you mean. That says a lot, and it builds a lot. It builds a lot of character in you, and it could show the other person that you also have character towards them. And then the other thing when it talks about sort of empathy and ethics here is that, and this is towards the end here. Excuse me, so I can tell you what page we're on. This is towards the end on page 129. And really it's the idea here, and it talks about the golden rule in the book, is you want to treat others the way you want to be treated. Right? At the end of the day, we all have to sort of respect each other and understand the idea that how you want to be treated is the same way that you should treat other people. Based on respect, based on other ethical and moral guidelines that you fall through. And in most cases, we all sort of know what those are. We grew up learning those and understanding those rules, right, placed on us. We can have a better communication with each other. And at the end of the day, that's what we kind of want to do, is we want to have communication with each other. All right. So with that said, that's the end of chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed it. It's actually one of my favorite chapters. And again, if there's ever any questions about about the chapter itself or anything in the class, please feel free to email me. I'm here to help you out. If you want to go ahead and just email me and set up a live Zoom meetings, I can always do that. I know I have office hours, but at the same time, if office hours don't work for you, you can always reach out to me and we could set something up that works for both of us, and we can have a live Zoom meeting. All right, everybody. I hope you're all having a good day. Take care, and I'll be talking to you soon. Bye bye.